Chapter 1: The Lone Gunslinger. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the dusty, barren desert. A harsh wind swept across the dry earth, stirring up the sand and carrying the scent of sweat, gunpowder, and the ever-present odor of death. In the distance, the silhouette of a rider appeared on the horizon, a lone figure riding atop a tired horse, his silhouette cutting through the setting sun. His name was Jack the Good Lancer, and he had come to this godforsaken land with one goal in mind: redemption. Jack had once been a man of honor, a lawman who stood up for justice in a world that seemed determined to drown in corruption. But that was before the war. Before the betrayal. Before everything had gone to hell. Now, Jack was nothing more than a ghost, a man haunted by his past, drifting through the desert like a tumbleweed, searching for something, anything, that could give him purpose again. He rode slowly, his worn boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step of the horse. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his weathered face, and his hand rested lightly on the hilt of the revolver at his side, a weapon he had become all too familiar with in recent years. The gun had taken the lives of men, women, and children alike, and Jack couldn't help but wonder if it had taken his soul as well. As he approached the small, dilapidated town of Perdition, he could feel the tension in the air. It was the kind of town where hope went to die, a place where lawlessness reigned and men fought for nothing more than survival. The kind of place where a man could disappear and no one would ever ask any questions. Jack had been to places like this before, and he knew better than to expect anything good to come from it. But there was something here, something that gnawed at the back of his mind. A rumor he had heard from a fellow traveler on the road. They spoke of a treasure hidden deep in the desert, a treasure so valuable that it could change the lives of anyone who possessed it. Some said it was gold, others said it was something even more precious, a map leading to a vast fortune buried beneath the earth. Whatever it was enough to bring Jack to perdition. The town was small, no more than a handful of buildings clustered together like a dying animal trying to find shelter. The saloon was the first building he passed, the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses drifting out from the swinging doors. Jack didn't bother stopping. He knew better than to trust the men inside. They were the kind of men who would sell their own mothers for a few dollars. Instead, he headed toward the town's only hotel, a rickety building that looked like it might collapse at any moment. He dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post, and walked slowly toward the entrance. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and he was met with the sour stench of cheap whiskey and stale smoke. The hotel clerk, a thin man with a nervous twitch in his eye, looked up from behind the counter as Jack approached. He wasn't surprised to see the lone gunslinger. People like Jack had a way of finding these places, drawn to the darkness like moths to a flame. "Need a room?" the clerk asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the room. It was empty, save for a few drunks slumped over at the bar. He stepped forward, sliding a handful of dusty bills across the counter. "Just for the night," Jack said. "And keep your mouth shut." The clerk didn't ask any questions. He took the money and handed Jack a key. As Jack made his way to his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in this town. There was something lurking in the shadows, something that didn't want to be found. And Jack knew he was about to find it. The door to his room creaked open, and he stepped inside. The room was sparsely furnished, the bed sagging in the middle like a man who had been beaten too many times. Jack dropped his saddlebags on the floor and made his way to the window, looking out over the town. It was then that he saw him. A figure in black, standing across the street. The man's face was obscured by the brim of his hat, but there was no mistaking the cold, calculating look in his eyes. This man wasn't here for the treasure. He wasn't here for the law. He was here for something else, something personal. Jack's hand instinctively went to the revolver at his side, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He'd met men like this before. The bad men. The ones who thrived in the chaos. The ones who didn't care about right or wrong, only power. And then, there was him, the ugly one. The one with no morals, no conscience, just the drive to survive at any cost. Jack's gaze hardened. He had come here for redemption. But it seemed that perdition had other plans for him. And those plans involved a showdown that would shake the desert to its core. Chapter 2: The Ugly Truth. The night fell over perdition like a shroud, heavy and oppressive. Jack stood at the window, his hand resting on the worn edge of the sill, staring into the inky blackness beyond. The town had settled into an eerie silence, save for the occasional gust of wind that howled through the empty streets. It was the kind of quiet that made a man uneasy, like the calm before the storm. He knew the figure across the street had seen him, had marked him. Jack wasn't one to shy away from a confrontation, but there was something different about this man. He wasn't like the usual outlaws Jack had faced in the past: drunkards, thieves, and men running from their pasts. This man had the look of someone who had seen more darkness than any human being should. And that made him dangerous. Jack turned away from the window and made his way back to the bed, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. He pulled off his dusty coat and set it across the chair, his fingers brushing the cold metal of his revolver as he did. He had known this day would come, he just hadn't expected it to come so soon. He sat on the bed, the springs creaking beneath his weight, and stared down at his boots. His mind was racing, the memories flooding back like a tidal wave he couldn't stop. The war. The betrayal. The moment he lost everything. It had all led him here, to this godforsaken town, to this night. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He stood up quickly, his hand going instinctively to the gun at his side. His eyes flicked toward the door, his heart beating faster now. He wasn't expecting company. Not in a town like this. Another knock. Louder this time. Jack approached the door cautiously, his boots silent on the floor. He reached for the handle and pulled the door open, revealing the figure in black. The man was tall, his frame imposing even in the dim light of the hallway. His face was hard, like it had been carved from stone, his eyes cold and calculating. He wore a long, black duster that swirled around his legs as he stepped forward. A scar ran down the left side of his face, from his forehead to his chin, a constant reminder of the brutal life he had lived. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his coat, and the faint gleam of a knife's handle could be seen at his side. "I thought I'd find you here," the man said, his voice low and grating. Jack didn't respond right away. He was sizing the man up, trying to get a sense of who he was, what he wanted. There was no question in Jack's mind, this was the man he had seen earlier, the one who had been watching him from across the street. "I'm not in the mood for games," Jack said, his voice rough. "What do you want?" The man chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "What I want doesn't matter. You're the one who's in the wrong place at the wrong time." Jack's fingers twitched, itching to draw his gun, but he knew better than to make the first move. The man wasn't here to talk, he was here to fight. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his gaze narrowing. The man stepped closer, his boots heavy against the floorboards. He was close enough now for Jack to smell the faint odor of sweat and tobacco on his skin. "Name's Cole. I've got a job to do, and you're in my way." Jack's eyes hardened. "And what kind of job is that?" Cole's lips curled into a thin smile. "The kind that involves killing people. And I'm guessing you're next on the list." Before Jack could react, Cole reached into his coat and pulled out a pair of pistols, twin revolvers, gleaming in the low light. The sight of the weapons sent a chill down Jack's spine, but he didn't flinch. He'd seen guns before. He'd even held them in his hands more times than he cared to count. But there was something different about Cole. Something darker. "I don't have time for this," Jack said, his hand already reaching for his own revolver. "You walk away now, and we'll both get out of here alive." Cole didn't answer. Instead, he dropped into a low crouch, his guns raised and aimed directly at Jack's chest. In the blink of an eye, Everything slowed down, the sound of the wind outside, the creaking of the building, all drowned out by the pounding of Jack's heart. But Jack didn't hesitate. He was faster. In one smooth motion, Jack drew his gun and fired. The shot rang out, loud and deafening in the small room, and Cole staggered back, his left shoulder ripped open by the bullet. He dropped to one knee, cursing under his breath. Jack didn't wait for him to recover. He fired again, this time hitting Cole square in the chest. The man let out a strangled gasp and fell backward, his gun slipping from his hands as he hit the floor. Jack stood over him, his gun still aimed at the lifeless body. For a moment, he just stared at the man, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had done it. He had survived another encounter. But the feeling of victory was short-lived. There was always someone else. Someone worse. Jack holstered his gun and walked to the window. He peered out, his eyes scanning the street below. The town was still quiet, too quiet. But Jack knew better than to trust the silence. It wouldn't last long. In the distance, a figure approached, walking slowly, deliberately. It was the third man. The Ugly One. Chapter 3: The Ugly One. The figure moved slowly across the empty street, his boots crunching softly against the dirt as the faint moonlight glinted off the barrel of his rifle. The man was tall and lanky, but there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, something that suggested strength hidden beneath the surface of his scruffy appearance. His face was covered by a ragged scarf, but even from this distance, Jack could see the hint of a scar that ran across the man's throat, a deep, jagged line that looked as though it had been left there by a blade, or perhaps a bullet. The Ugly One. Jack had heard the name whispered in the saloon earlier that day. Some said he was a bounty hunter, others claimed he was just a drifter. But no matter the story, one thing was certain: the man had a reputation for being ruthless, a killer with no conscience, no morals. As Jack watched the man approach, his fingers tightened around the gun at his side. The last thing he wanted was another confrontation, but he had learned long ago that in places like Perdition, trouble never waited for you to be ready. It found you, whether you were looking for it or not. The Ugly One stopped in front of the hotel, his eyes scanning the building, looking for any sign of movement. He didn't seem to care that Jack was watching from the window, as if he was used to being observed by people who had no choice but to fear him. Jack remained still, his heart beating steadily in his chest, trying to calm his nerves. He had faced men like this before, but there was something about this one that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He wasn't just another outlaw looking to make a quick buck. This man was something else entirely. The Ugly One took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the door of Jack's room. Jack's hand instinctively went to his gun again, but this time, he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming. The door to Jack's room creaked open behind him, and a voice called out from the shadows. "Not so fast." Jack spun around, his gun drawn, but he froze when he saw who was standing in the doorway. It was a woman. She was tall, her long black hair flowing like a dark river behind her. Her eyes were cold and calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. She wore a long coat that flared out around her knees, and in her hand was a small, gleaming revolver. Her gaze shifted between Jack and the Ugly One, assessing the situation with a quick, practiced glance. "You're not going to shoot him," she said flatly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "At least, not yet." Jack raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening on the handle of his revolver. "And why not?" The woman stepped forward, her boots clicking sharply against the wooden floor. She moved like a predator, every step measured, controlled. "Because if you do, he'll be the last man you kill in this town." The Ugly One smirked beneath his scarf, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I wouldn't bet on that," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't what he expected. He had come here looking for a fight, but now he found himself in the middle of a standoff with two of the deadliest people he had ever encountered. The woman was an unknown, but there was something about her that made him uneasy. She wasn't afraid of him. And that was the problem. "What do you want?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced over at the ugly one, who nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. She turned back to Jack, her lips curling into a smile that was more of a threat than a gesture of kindness. "I want what's mine," she said simply. "And you're standing in my way." Jack's brow furrowed. "What's yours?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a worn map, unfolding it carefully in front of Jack's eyes. The paper was old, frayed at the edges, and there were marks and symbols drawn across it in a language Jack didn't recognize. "This map leads to something valuable," she continued, her eyes narrowing as she studied Jack. "Something hidden in these very deserts. And I'm the only one who knows where it is." Jack's mind clicked into place. The treasure. The thing that had brought him to perdition. The one thing he had hoped to find, something that could give him a reason to keep going, something to redeem him. "But it's not just treasure," she added, her voice darkening. "It's power. Enough power to change the course of everything. But only for those strong enough to claim it." Jack's eyes flicked to the ugly one, who hadn't moved since the woman had appeared. "And him?" Jack asked, gesturing toward the man who had been standing silently in the corner. The woman smirked. "He's just here to make sure I get what's mine. He's not interested in the treasure. He's interested in something else." The ugly one nodded, his eyes never leaving Jack. "The treasure's just a bonus," he growled. "I've got my own reasons for being here." Jack's hand clenched around his gun. This was all too much. He had come here looking for redemption, for peace. But what he had found was a war that was only just beginning. And he was stuck right in the middle of it. "Why me?" Jack asked, his voice hard. The woman smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "Because you're the one who can help us find it." Chapter 4, The Choice. Jack stood frozen in the room, his mind racing. He had always thought himself to be a man of purpose, driven by his quest for redemption, but here he was, caught between two powerful figures, each with their own agenda. The woman, with her mysterious map, and the ugly one, who was a living embodiment of danger. Jack had always believed that a man's choices defined who he was, but now he was realizing how quickly that belief could fall apart when the stakes were high. "You want me to help you find this treasure?" Jack asked, his voice still steady, though the weight of the situation was pressing down on him. "Why me?" The woman's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating fire. "Because you're a man who's been to the bottom," she said, stepping closer, "and you know how to get back up. We've been tracking this treasure for months. You've heard the stories. But no one's been able to get close enough. There's something about this place, something that drives men mad if they don't have the right focus." "And what's that focus?" Jack asked, his hands still hovering near his gun. "Survival," she replied, her voice hardening. "Out here, survival is the only thing that matters. And I can tell you have that driving you. You wouldn't be standing here otherwise." Jack studied her, eyes narrowing. She was calculating, cold, and sharp. He had no doubt she was dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than the ugly one, who had yet to speak much beyond his gruff remarks. But there was something else about her, something familiar. He'd seen eyes like hers before. Eyes that saw everything as a means to an end, eyes that didn't hesitate when it came to using others. Jack's mind flicked back to the past, to his days as a lawman, to the men he'd caught, the ones who had never blinked as they pulled the trigger. The same kind of men he was dealing with now. He hadn't wanted to get involved in another fight, but now, it seemed as though there was no choice. "You're not the first to try and find it," Jack muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The woman's smile turned sharp. No, we're not. But we'll be the last. There was a weight to her words, something final about them. The treasure she spoke of was no ordinary prize. Jack had heard rumors over the years, whispers of something buried deep in the desert, something that could change the course of history. It sounded too good to be true. And it probably was. The ugly one shifted slightly, the shadows still hiding much of his face, but Jack could feel the man's presence, like an animal waiting for the right moment to strike. You still haven't told me what the ugly one wants with this treasure, Jack said, turning his gaze to the silent man. The woman's eyes flicked to the ugly one, and for the first time, she seemed to hesitate. Her lips tightened, but she didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, she sighed, as though she had come to terms with the fact that Jack wasn't going to just blindly follow along. He's after power, she said softly. Not the kind of power you'd expect. He wants the map, he's after the key to what's hidden beneath the desert. That's all he cares about. Jack's brow furrowed. Power? He was beginning to piece it together, but there was still something missing. Yes, she answered. And that's why you're here. Because we can't do this without you. We need someone who knows the desert, someone who understands the old ways. We need you, Jack. She said his name with such certainty, as though she had been planning for this moment all along. Jack didn't know if he could trust her or if he even wanted to, but there was something deep in his gut telling him that there was more to this than met the eye. Why should I trust you? Jack asked, his voice hardening. What's to stop me from taking your map and leaving you both in the dust? She shrugged, as though the question didn't matter. You could try. But I don't think you're that kind of man, Jack. You've been in this game long enough to know that loyalty matters. And if you walk away now, you'll never have a chance at redemption. You'll just keep running, like you always do. Her words hit harder than any bullet ever could. Jack's breath caught in his chest. She was right, and he hated the fact that she knew it. The truth was, he had been running for a long time. He had been running from the memories of his past, from the things he'd done and the people he'd failed. But this was different. This was a chance to make things right. Or, at least, that's what he told himself. Jack glanced back at the ugly one, who still said nothing, his eyes cold as ice. All right, Jack said, his voice low and steady. I'll help you. But when this is over, I expect my share of whatever's out there. The woman's smile returned, but it wasn't one of warmth. It was the smile of a predator. Of course. You'll get your share, Jack. But remember this, in a game like this, the rules change quickly. Trust no one, not even me. Jack nodded. He didn't need to be told twice. The world they were about to enter was one of betrayal, power, and violence. He knew that better than anyone. But the treasure wasn't what intrigued him most. No, what kept him here was the possibility, just the possibility, that he could find something more than gold. Something that could give him the redemption he had been craving. Where do we start? Jack asked, his tone sharp and determined. The woman's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the room. We start where the map tells us to. In the heart of the desert. And once we find it, nothing will ever be the same again. Chapter 5, The Final Showdown. The morning sun rose over the desert, casting long shadows across the parched earth. The air was thick with heat, shimmering on the horizon as Jack, the woman, and the ugly one mounted their horses and set out toward the vast, uncharted wilderness that lay ahead. The map, now folded and tucked away in the woman's coat, was their only guide, leading them deeper into a land where few had dared to venture and fewer still had ever returned. Jack had thought the worst was over when he agreed to help them. But now, riding side by side with these two dangerous people, he could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. They had come for the treasure, yes, but there was something more at stake here. something bigger than gold or power. And Jack wasn't sure he was ready for it. The wind kicked up as they rode, dust swirling around them like a warning, but the silence between them was deafening. The woman, whose name Jack still hadn't learned, kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if she already knew what awaited them. The ugly one Nicole, he had finally confirmed, rode ahead, his back straight and his rifle slung across his shoulders, like a man who had already accepted his fate. Jack's thoughts wandered to the desert itself. It was unforgiving, a place that stripped men of their humanity, where the land seemed to punish anyone who dared to enter its grasp. Yet, here they were, pressing forward into its heart, as though they were destined to find something that no one had ever seen before. They rode for hours, the vast expanse of the desert stretching endlessly before them. The map had led them to a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side. The air grew colder as they entered the gorge, the high cliffs casting long shadows over the ground. Jack could feel the tension in the air, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Cole pulled his horse to a stop, his sharp eyes scanning the narrow passage ahead. "This is it," he said, his voice rough and low. The woman nodded, her face unreadable. "We're close now." Jack didn't need to ask what they were searching for. He knew the answer. It was something that had been lost for centuries, something powerful enough to change the course of history. But Jack also knew that whatever they found, it wouldn't come without a price. They continued on foot, their horses left behind as they trekked deeper into the canyon. The walls loomed high above them, blocking out the sun and casting the path in an eerie half-light. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground, the occasional gust of wind rattling the rocks above them. Finally, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in dust and ivy, as though it had been waiting for them for ages. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. There was something about this place that felt wrong, unnatural, almost. The woman stepped forward, her eyes locked on the altar. She pulled the map from her coat and unfolded it, her fingers tracing the faded lines. She muttered something under her breath, something Jack couldn't understand. Then, with a sudden movement, she stepped up to the altar and placed her hand on the stone. Nothing happened at first. Then, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Jack's eyes widened. "What the hell?" The woman didn't answer. Her focus remained fixed on the altar, her lips moving in silent words. Cole moved closer, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle, ready for anything. Jack instinctively reached for his gun as well, the tension rising with every passing second. The earth shook again, stronger this time. Dust and rocks fell from the canyon walls above them, and the air grew thick with the smell of ancient stone and forgotten secrets. And then, the altar shifted. It wasn't just a stone. It was a door. The ground cracked open as the altar slid to the side, revealing a dark passage that led deep underground. A cold, dry wind gusted out from the opening, carrying with it a sense of finality. The woman turned to face Jack and Cole. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of triumph and foreboding. "We've found it." Jack stared into the darkness of the passage. For a moment, he hesitated, but then something inside him stirred. It wasn't just about redemption anymore. It wasn't just about survival. It was about facing whatever came next, no matter the cost. "We go in," Jack said, his voice steady. Without another word, the three of them stepped forward, entering the dark passage. The air grew colder as they descended, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were smooth and slick, as if the stone had been carved by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed forward, ignoring the unease that threatened to consume him. They reached the bottom of the passage and found themselves in a vast underground chamber. The floor was covered in dust, and the air smelled of stale air and ancient decay. In the center of the chamber was a massive stone pedestal, and atop it rested a single object, a small, intricately carved chest. Jack's heart raced as he approached the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the chest. It was beautiful, delicate, and undeniably old. He could feel the power radiating from it, even from a distance. This was it. This was what they had come for. But as his hand reached out to touch it, the woman stepped forward, her eyes hard. "It's mine," she said. Jack's gaze snapped to hers, and for the first time, he saw something truly dangerous in her eyes. She wasn't here to share. She was here to take everything. "Don't do this," Jack said, his voice low and firm. "We agreed. A share." The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't kind. "You really think I came this far just to split it with you?" she asked. "No. This is mine, and you're just a tool to get me here. Now step aside." Jack's heart pounded as he reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, the ugly one moved, drawing his rifle in one swift motion. He aimed it at Jack. "You should have known," Cole muttered. "The treasure isn't just gold. It's power. And power doesn't get shared." Jack's mind raced as he realized the trap had been set long before he had stepped into perdition. He was nothing more than a pawn in their game, and now, he was going to have to fight his way out. The chamber felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the woman and Cole stood between him and the chest. The power that had seemed so alluring was now a curse, one that would cost him everything. Jack knew what he had to do. There was only one way out of this. "Last chance," Jack said, his voice cold and steady. "Move." But neither of them did.